Hey everyone, Darshan Maharaja here. Wanted to talk about this name change of Dundas Street in Toronto. Actually, I wrote about this in my short takes yesterday. If you haven't seen that, I suggest that you do. And this is subscriber only content, so maybe you can subscribe to my website, darshanmaharaja.ca. The only thing I need is your email address, and I don't share it with anyone ever. So it's just subscriber only content where I put brief thoughts on typically three issues each time, twice a week. So if you are interested in more of my views on issues in Canada, I request you to subscribe to my website. And as I wrote yesterday, this whole proposal is based on a complete wrong reading of history. And actually, when this issue emerged for the first time in 2020, it was more than 3 years ago, around May or June of 2020. I dug into this because the name Dundas was, I've explained in my article. It's titled Dad's Last Letter, that is on my website. I wrote that article because what I found was completely different and easily accessible information. Uh, if you compare it with uh, what people are led to believe in Canada about Henry Dundas, uh, the narrative is completely ahistorical, which is a polite way of saying that it's completely bogus. But beyond that, I wanted to make a couple of points because Henry Dundas was actually an abolitionist. He secured the freedom of a black slave in Scotland. He was a lawyer and got the Scottish government to pass anti-slavery law. Then he teamed up with Lord Simcoe here, who was Governor General of Upper Canada, to make the slave trade illegal. They did it in their own way back in 1793. This was basically 4 decades before even the British Empire outlawed slavery. But somehow, all the compromises that he had to make, because you have to understand that there were a lot of very powerful commercial trade and political interests in favor of maintaining the slave trade. So necessarily he had to make a lot of compromises that was misinterpreted, and it's still being misinterpreted in Canada to say that he basically delayed the end of slave trade by 15 years. That is a starting point for me, which I wrote about 3 years ago and again yesterday. And what this means to me is that the most remarkable part of this is that all the city politicians in Toronto who were in favor of changing the name because of his association, so called, with the slave trade, none of them tried to inform themselves of the actual historical facts which I discovered in 10 minutes online. So it doesn't take a long time. And, I see a lot of people saying that they basically gave the task to someone in their staff in the city, and they prepared a report and the politicians were going by that report. But I think this is an issue that is so grave because it impacts on the character of Canada and the people who are prominent in Canadian history. So I think it would have been incumbent on them to derive first-hand knowledge of the facts, which they didn't. And even now, I mean, the tide seems to be turning because now Mayor Chow is stuck between a rock and a hard place because the actual historical facts are becoming more and more known. Uh, Three former mayors of Toronto have written a joint letter to Mayor Chow to revisit the issue. They have to be polite. They can't say that you got it completely wrong. But so now, media is also getting interested in this, which brings me to my major point today, which is that in all these 3 years, I haven't seen the media try to correct the false narrative. for politicians, it's okay. I mean, we don't like it, but we know that it's politics. So, scoring these brownie points, pun intended, is the cheapest, in fact, cost-free way of gaining popularity. As it says in the book of morphology, leadership consists of finding a crowd that is going somewhere and then getting in front of it. But politicians, by virtue of their office, are at an advantage in this because they don't have to make an effort to try and get in front of that crowd because the crowd is eager to put them in front because it validates their claims, whatever claim they are making. So it's one of those cases where a synergistic relationship between two entities is actually harmful to the surrounding because the activists are pushing an agenda and they benefit from the politician's endorsement and the politician benefits from being seen as the virtuous one. So that is a disappointment, but not the major one, because in my view, the function of the media is to inform the public. And for 3 years, I mean, there may have been one or two pieces here or there. I haven't seen any, but I'm open to the possibility. But they didn't carry out the kind of crusade that they did in the case of Senator Mike Duffy, for example, wall to wall coverage for days and weeks and months, including our national broadcaster. And ultimately, Mike Duffy, I don't think he was ever held guilty of all the charges. I think there were about 31, but that's a different issue. The outcome of a legal case is largely, independent, and therefore it was kind of, if they had just, mentioned it that this has happened and then stopped at it, that was a different thing. But they did not show any of that energy to correcting the false narrative around Henry Dundas. And that is my biggest disappointment in Canada because my expectations were different of Canada. Now, I am not being idealistic here. The view from a distance usually tends to be rosier than reality. I am aware of that. But, you know, getting it wrong on so many major stories time after time after time for years and years, and these are grave stories, as I said, they impact on the character of Canada. And nobody even thought to dig into the details. And apart from a few independent voices, there is one individual that I'm in contact with on Twitter, or maybe I should say X now, whose last name is also Dundas, although she is only distantly related to Henry Dundas. But these are the few people who are trying to correct the patently false narrative around Henry Dundas. And the media hasn't shown any inclination to do so until the climate changes, then they will jump on the bandwagon. So I don't want any bandwagonistas in media. I want people who have the energy and the inclination to find out actual facts and bring them to the people. So these are the points that I wanted to add to my article and my short take yesterday. The article is again titled Dad's Last Letter on darshanmaharaja.ca. And the piece that I wrote, short one, maybe about 300 words, on Henry Dundas yesterday, was part of my short takes that goes out only to subscribers twice a week, usually 3 topics each time. So you get my views in brief on 6 different issues every week. So once again, I request you to consider subscribing to my website and to this YouTube channel as well. I'll see you again the next time. Thank you.